I'm still looking out for these kids. Every family in this city matters to me. Every soul in the city matters to me. So everything's the same. I'm just not in the Kenny uniform anymore, which is okay because the love is still there. It's still gonna go on. Man. Thank you, everyone.
So Boogie, a little choked up. We don't often see that side of him, and clearly he loved the city of Sacramento. So the Pelicans now, his new home, are currently 2.5 games out of the 8th and final spot. Max, I want to start with you here. What's the ceiling for New Orleans now that they've acquired him?
Look, this season the ceiling is maybe you can win a playoff game because you're likely to be the 8th seed if you make it in. That means you're going to face the Warriors. You want to say you get to a Game 6, that's a major victory for this team and this franchise right now. But the ceiling long-term is quite high. They have a coach, let's not forget, in Alvin Gentry, who's from the Popovich tree, right? Not to mention D'Antoni, but who's looking pretty good right now. But what do you notice about Popovich and R.C. Buford and all these guys, those executives and those coaches, is that no matter what happens in the league, they seem to adapt. You hear Popovich talking about he's not even into the 3 ball, but that's part of the game. You're going to lose if you don't shoot him. So he adopted a lot of what D'Antoni, as I mentioned, another guy that Gentry's coached under, was doing, and probably did it even better than D'Antoni. He takes bits and pieces empirically, meaning he sees what works in the real world, and he uses them. And that's the coach that these guys have now, Boogie and Anthony Davis. So I know it's a guard-driven three-point shooting league, and now you have Twin Towers, though they can do a lot of things that guards have traditionally done, particularly Anthony Davis, but also Boogie in terms of shooting from outside. And you say, well, how are Twin Towers supposed to work when you have so many resources put there in a guard-driven spread offense type league? But in Gentry, again, you have a really good coach from a coaching tree that sees what works and does that. I think the sky's the limit for this franchise if they can hold on to their Twin Towers. But in terms of their short-term prospects, Stephen A., I say a playoff win this year would be a major accomplishment. A playoff win in one game would be a major accomplishment.
I agree with you on your latter point because that one win would be coming against the #1 seed, which happens to be the Golden State Warriors, who are the favorites to win it all. I agree with your latter point. Your former point would be quite different. And this is a hard subject for me to tackle. But it's first take. It's what we do, and I ain't running from anything. Alvin Gentry's a good man and a really, really damn good basketball mind. He deserves credit for that. I'm happy he got the opportunity to coach the New Orleans Pelicans. But I want to put for the record on here, he has to be watched. Alvin Gentry has coached in the NBA. He's been a head coach 14 seasons. Now, some of them are partial seasons because he took over on an interim basis and things of that nature. He's coached in Miami. He's coached in Detroit. He's coached in Phoenix, obviously, where he had his best season. I think it was like 2009, 2010, when he went 54 and 28 max, and Kobe drilled that jumper against him in the playoffs to pat him on the backside to let him know you're finished, it's over, the Lakers are moving on. We get that. But in his 14 years as a coach, Max, did you know that Alvin Gentry only has 2 winning seasons? 2 seasons with a winning record. That's it in 14 years. Now, in his years in Phoenix, he's won, 52% of his games. Outside of that, Miami, 41%. Detroit, 50% of his games. Los Angeles Clippers, 40% of his games. New Orleans right now with a 53 and 86 record, 38% of his games. So when we talk about the ceiling, once again, we can't just talk about the players. We have to talk about what you have in place. Now, I don't believe he's had the talent, so he can't be judged by what he's done in New Orleans as of yet. And I do believe that he was doing a good enough job in Phoenix where it might have been, he should not have lost the job even though he was 13 and 28 that year when they decided to let him go in 2013. But in the end, what cannot be escaped is the fact that we have to be careful about what we're saying when we're throwing out greatness, because the nuances of the game of basketball is something he may have mastery over, me, you, or anybody else. But we do have a right to judge his record. And overall, his record as a head coach is 388, 456. That's 46% of your games you've won. That is not greatness. And so now that Alvin Gentry has DeMarcus Cousins with Anthony Davis, let's be clear. He got to get it done. First things first, you got to get to the playoffs. You got to get that number 8 seed, okay? And then next year, after you get it, because I believe he will get them to the playoffs, he's on the clock in terms of him having to show that he's that coach that we all believe he is capable of being. But we have an obligation to point out that the record doesn't spell greatness. And if you don't know about the coach, then you don't know about the team, because we've seen talented teams get ruined by subpar coaching. We got to find that out.
Right, but in Gentry's case, as you point out, a lot of times in Miami and other, he's an interim coach. Why are you an interim coach? Because the other guy got fired or something bad happened. Why did that happen? Usually because you don't have enough good players. I mean, in L.A., where he would make the playoffs, he had a bad record the year he was fired, but the couple of seasons he was there, we'd make the Elton Brand Clippers. They weren't a great team, but they had enough talent that he was around 500. I don't remember exactly the record, but he was okay. They didn't have some transformative franchise centerpiece. He now has 2 of them, literally centerpieces. And so you're right, the clock is, he's on the clock starting, I believe, in the beginning of next season. This season, you're right, the goal is make the playoffs. Next season, you want to see progress. Let's not forget, when you're in a market that doesn't necessarily attract talent, where you have to figure out how to get talent there, it's not the same as, you know, as coaching the Miami Heat nowadays or a place like that.
Well, first of all, let me make a correction, because he didn't quit. I mean, he didn't get fired. He actually quit, I believe, from the Phoenix job. But all I'm trying to say is this. Everything wasn't an interim. Remember, he was in Detroit 1, 2, 3 years before departing. He was in the Clippers 1, 2, 3 years before departing. He was in Phoenix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years or 4.5 years before departing. Those are not interims. Those are you on the job, in the job long enough where to build and establish a culture, and more importantly, to establish your greatness. So all I'm saying is this. I think he's in the best situation that he has been in, but Alvin Gentry has to show up in this equation. You got Boogie Cousins and Anthony Davis. You can get away with getting the 8th seed now because of where you are, but from this point forward, you got to show that this is one of the better teams, because you got a front line like that with Drew Holiday. There's no excuse to be mediocre.
And
that's all I'm saying.
He's going to be hearing the Calipari word come up a lot every time they lose for the rest of this season. Of course, but that's what's going to be discussed in the media and among fans.
Let's leave it there. More question marks to get to, but in the NFL, you guys mentioned quitting. Well, the Cowboys quit on Tony Romo, and there is little question that he won't be in Dallas next season. But if you're the Houston Texans, should he be your top priority? In 2 days until the NBA trade deadline, what team needs to make a move for Melo? We'll get into all of it.
Then the deal we actually pulled the trigger on, but we need to change the culture. What Vlade Divac is telling you is, this is out of my hands. My hands are tied. I'm getting orders to behave in a certain way that is counterproductive, that is suboptimal for our team. The answer is yes, absolutely. Boogie Cousins is being scapegoated. Stephen A., as you say, it's not that he's an angel. And obviously, you look at his trade value around the league, it's not nearly what it should be. It doesn't indicate his skills because he is considered a team destroyer, obviously. But he is being scapegoated here for 2 things. Ronadive, the owner, apparently believes Buddy Hield is Steph Curry. That's embarrassing. The other thing is, Ronadive, the owner, thinks he knows anything about basketball. Remember when he said he wanted him to cherry pick on defense a couple of years ago? He came into the NBA, bought the team, and started talking about disrupting. The only thing this owner is disrupting is the Sacramento Kings' ability to have a franchise, a successful franchise, to win games. Now, it's not either or. It's not as though, you know, either DeMarcus Cousins is the good guy or not. You know, he's the good guy or they're the good guy, he's the bad guy or they're the bad guy. Couple of bad guys here. The culture of the team is broken, of the franchise is broken. Fish rots from the head down. That starts with Ronadive. By the way, Isaiah Thomas on that team couldn't win, even though he was averaging like 20 and 6 back then. He's on the Celtics. He's winning just fine. Let's not forget Isaiah Thomas's free agent value, largely because of his work with the Kings, a little bit with the Suns, but largely because of the Kings. Excuse me, no, he signed with the Suns. I take that back. Just because of his work with the Kings, he was considered a losing player. So he got under $7 million a year, even though he put up 20 and 6, because you can't win in Sacramento. And how's Isaiah Thomas now? Is he a losing player? Does he have a problem winning? Nothing wrong with Isaiah Thomas. He's a winner, not fourth quarter points, etc., winning like crazy in Boston. The problem is when he's playing in Sacramento. Now, the question is that the culture of the franchise or Boogie? Both may be complicit, but here Boogie is being scapegoated by a rotten franchise, and the GM is basically telling you that. I could have had a better deal. I am not unfettered. My hands are tied in a certain way that makes it difficult for me to do my job. That's what I get from that remarkable piece of video. And yes, Boogie Cousins is being scapegoated.
He's definitely being scapegoated, but it resonates far deeper than that. First of all, let's understand that DeMarcus Cousins is not approaching free agency. He literally has another full year to go until the summer of 2018 when he's scheduled to be a free agent. That means you could have waited until the season ended. Obviously, in the offseason, teams usually have more cap space, and they're in a position to do more things because they have more maneuverability and flexibility. That's ignorant part number one of the Sacramento Kings. Number two, considering the fact that, again, because you are scheduled to have that, you could have them on the roster, paired with Anthony Davis. They might win basketball games, and as a result, you know, and I'm saying it could elevate his value now that he's going to be in New Orleans. But the point is, if you're Sacramento, you could have avoided all of that because you simply could have waited. Number three, and more importantly, when I look at this, and I'm sick and tired of people not bringing this up. These organizations, you know, there was Dennis Rodmans in the world. There was Dennis Rodmans. There were the Vernon Maxwells of the world. There was Xavier McDaniels of the world. The Charles Oakleys or the Anthony Masons of the world. Guys that, you know, sometimes could be problematic or what have you. The fact of the matter is, I remember Charles Oakley. This dude actually got into a fight with assistant coach Paul Silas, a fist fight while he was playing, and Paul Silas was an assistant coach, for crying out loud. These kind of things happen. But in the end, if you have an organization that has cachet, what transpires is that ultimately they're able to reel guys in because they prioritize what contributes to the success of the team. If you are not playing and you're a coach or an executive, why is it that you get away with constantly blaming players instead of being held accountable for what you don't do? I don't understand that.
I'll give you, I think, a better example even than the guys you mentioned, Rasheed Wallace. Because if you look at Boogie, Boogie is a better version of that. Rasheed Wallace is the most talented of the various guys we've mentioned, maybe except for Robin, but certainly offensively, and was considered bad, and he stopped you from winning, and he wasn't a winning player, and he was a losing player. Then he got to the Pistons, and he was the best player, arguably, on a championship team. And that's what Boogie Cousins, and he's more talented than Rasheed Wallace, and who's very talented.
Being coached by Larry Brown, by the way. Being coached by Larry Brown with Joe Dumars as an executive. Yes.
Right. And by the way, if you look at Boogie on the Kings, it's hard to separate that out until now. Is it the rotten culture? Is it Boogie? Is it both that prevented even Isaiah Thomas with him from doing anything? Now Isaiah's winning. Well, we're about to find out. If it can work with Anthony Davis, boy, that makes Ronadive and that franchise look even worse than they look right now, which is pretty bad.
Let's spin the conversation forward. So we've heard from Vladdy. Boogie has also spoken. He might be headed to the Bayou, but part of his heart is clearly still in Sacramento. Take a listen.
My love for this city has never changed.
Love you, Boogie.
Love you, Boogie. My love for this city has never changed.